Hey everybody. I'd like to thank everybody at the History Center for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I love talking about these schools. And I want to thank a few people. Mr. Charles Luster's here from the African American Heritage Museum and over here on Summerlin Street. I'd like to thank Dorinda Gerard, who's librarian here, and she helps me a bunch. And Luann Mims, who's the head of the Lakeland Special Collections Room at the Lakeland Library, is a great help to me. And Mr. Clifton Lewis from the L.B. Brown House has also helped out. And there's a lady in Haines City who helped me out tremendously with some Fisk Rosenwald records named Ann Huffman. And she's working on a project in Haines City about African American history in Haines City. So she's a fellow writer and researcher, and hi, I'm glad to see you. So anyway, we're gonna talk about Rosenwald Schools today. There's a couple of word terms that you're gonna hear that are period terms, probably only about 4 times, Negro and colored, and they're only gonna be used during the description of sources and direct quotes from people of the time. Murtis, did you take my notes? There you go. But anyway,
Excuse me.
Thanks, no problem. Okay, so we'll get started out. This is Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington. And pretty much everybody's heard of Booker T. Washington, but not everybody's heard of Julius Rosenwald. He is like kind of the Bill Gates of the 1900s and early 1900s. He was a philanthropist, and he was the CEO of Sears Roebuck, starting in about 1894 until his death in 1932. He was born in 1862, and as I said, died in 1932. Booker T. Washington was an educator, and he was on the board of trustees for the Tuskegee Institute. And Booker had an idea that he wanted to teach rural children in the South. And he wanted to build a series of schoolhouses all around the South, and because kids in the city had opportunity for schools and the kids in the country did not. So he had this rural community school plan, but he needed some money to get this thing going. So he went to Julius Rosenwald to pitch his idea and see if he could get some funding from Rosenwald. Well, Rosenwald already knew Booker T. Washington, as he had read his book called Up From Slavery, which I think was published in 1901. So Rosenwald was familiar with Booker T. Washington, and when Washington approached him, he loved the idea and he accepted it. So Booker T. immediately put JR on the board of trustees for Tuskegee, and the two men went to work. And the collaboration that these two men had resulted in over 5,000 buildings in 15 states across the South. This, you can see, is about Booker T. Washington in a speech he gave at a city ballpark. Obviously, he was known by more than just Julius Rosenwald. The whole world knew who Booker T. Washington was. He was very famous. Well, at this ballpark that he went to, he spoke in front of 2,000 people, and he said something that they quoted in the article that I could hear him saying to Julius Rosenwald. Our white friends can help us and help themselves at the same time by seeing to it that the Negro family is provided with just as good a school accommodations in the country as in the city. So he's making a point about the children in the country not having any place to go to school. They may have had a room with a log building with a dirt floor, or they might have been educated above somebody's store. They could have been educated under a shade tree, but they didn't have a school per se like the kids in the city did. Now this ballpark that they mention up here still exists today. And it's just south of the corner on Florida Avenue and Memorial Boulevard in Lakeland, right here in Polk County. And this speech was given on March 5th, 1912. And right here in Polk County. And Booker T, less than a year later, they would already have started on the first Rosenwald School, and it would be open up about a year from when he gave this speech. The first Rosenwald School was built 10 miles north of Tuskegee in Alabama, in a place called Lochapoka, Alabama, and they built 6 around the Tuskegee rural area to start out in 1912. This is the map of all the Rosenwald schools that they built. And to give you an idea about what an accomplishment this is, they built, in the end, it was 5,357 schools. This is in 1931, the building fund ended in 1932. But to kind of get a perspective on how many buildings that is, between 1954 and 1974, which is 20 years, which is how long Rosenwald and Washington had, Ray Kroc only built 3,000 McDonald's. So they well outdid Ray Kroc. Now, what is a Rosenwald school? They're schools, as I mentioned, for rural children in the South. The only state, by the way, that's not listed up there is Missouri, but they only had 2 Rosenwald schools. 813 in North Carolina was the most. So they got together, Booker T and Julius, and they said, Booker T. Washington comes up with the idea and says, well, wow, we could use materials from Sears Roebuck. Because some of you might know that in the day, you could actually buy a house from Sears and Roebuck. So they were going to use the materials to build their schools with Sears and Roebuck materials. But Julius Rosenwald wouldn't hear it. He said, no, we're not doing that because I don't want anybody to think that I'm going to get any kind of a profit from building these schools. And on the same token, when they built the schools, he didn't want his name on the schools. He didn't want to be called Rosenwald Schools. Few were, but not many of them. And so the reason he didn't want that is because he didn't want the notoriety. He was a very modest man, and he didn't want anybody to think that he would profit or gain anything from his philanthropy. So they started building schools. And they had a lot of different designs. They had 1 teacher through 7 teacher schools. Now everybody's heard of the old 1-room schoolhouse. Well, that was not in Booker T. Washington's vocabulary. There was no such thing as a 1-room schoolhouse. They had a 1 teacher school, 2 teacher, 3 teacher, 4 teacher, 5 teacher, 6 teacher, 7 teacher. Which means that the 1 teacher school had a classroom, but it also had an industrial room, and it would have a cloakroom where the kids could put their coats. So you would have at least 3 rooms in a 1 teacher school. And then as they got bigger, same thing. A 2 teacher type would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms if it had cloakrooms. And then they went all the way up to 7 teacher schools. In order to get the school going, the people in the community, the African American people in the community, would have to first come up with some money. Rosenwald wanted to help, but he did not believe in any kind of a handout. He would not, and he also didn't match it dollar for dollar. The money had to come from the African Americans first. If white people in the area wanted to donate, they could, and they did, not all the time, but they did. And then public money from the school board, taxes, and then the Rosenwald Fund would kick in some more money, and it varied all the time, but it was usually about 1/5, but that's really vague. So it could be anywhere from $500, actually $100, up to $5,000, depending on the size of the school and when it was built. So after they got the money together, and they had to do that first. It wasn't like you get on the phone and start cranking on it and say, hey, Mr. Rosenwald, I'm building a school, I need some money. It didn't work like that. You had to say, fill out an application, send it in, say, here's how much money we have, now we'd like to have a school. And in order for the school to work, it had to be run by the white school board. So they had to get the school board to agree to it and put money in, which you can imagine that could be a challenge. So, but it worked, obviously. There was over 5,000 of these schools, so they were able to get it done. The Rosenwald schools in, let's see what I was, sorry. Okay, the building plans, we talked about the schools, how to get them. That's it, we're good, we're going. All right, now in Polk County, we had 5 Rosenwald schools. We had the Oakland School, which is the one in Haines City, which is right here. And we had 2 Rosenwald schools in what is now Winter Haven, but at the time it was Florence Villa. So that's 3. And then we had the Union Academy, which is right here in Bartow, and we had the Fruitlands Academy in Lake Wales. So those are our 5 schools. Now the schools had names here called Oakland, Fruitlands, Union, but if you gather information on Rosenwald schools, the first place you start out is at Fisk University in Nashville. And they have all the building fund, Rosenwald Building Fund records at Fisk, and they're all listed by town. So in Haines City, if you look it up, you're not going to find the Oakland School, you're going to find the Haines City School. And same thing in Lake Alfred, the Bartow School, the Florence Villa School. And Florence Villa is the only one that the name actually matches up because the neighborhood of Florence Villa still is around, and at the time it was not part of Winter Haven. So the Oakland School that's a Fisk University picture of it right there. It's a terrible picture, but the Oakland School in Haines City is kind of an oddity because of that right there, that cupola. Usually you did not see any type of added ornamentation on a Rosenwald school. The schools were all very plainly built, out of wood, very unassuming and modest. And you can imagine why that is. If they built a school that happened to be better or better looking than the white school, good night Irene. So this is what the floor plan looks like for the Oakland School in Haines City. And this was a 6-teacher type, and you can see there's more than 6 rooms there. And depending on whether the building faced east or west or north or south, as you can see on the bottom there, they had different designs for how the school was going to be set up. And this one is an east-west facing one. And then, as we'll see in a few minutes, the Florence Villa School, the first one, was also a 6-teacher type, but it looked nothing like this. But we'll get to that in just a second. Now, Rosenwald schools can always be identified by these large banks of windows they had. Say if you had a 2-teacher type school, we use this for an example too. The windows are these little notches up here. And there would be at least 4 of them per classroom, and they would have little framing, and they would be very big, so that they would let in all the natural light that was possible. Because Rosenwald schools didn't have any electricity in the beginning. Well, the whole time the building fund was in progress, they didn't have electricity. And then they, of course, didn't have running water or anything. So they had these floor plans that would maximize the amount of light they got in the classroom. So that even the way that the buildings were built, so that the sun would come from the east and the west, and you would get it in the classroom. And they were so well thought out that they would position the children's desks so that a right-handed child wouldn't put shade on his work when he was writing. They were extremely well thought out. And one of the factors for getting the money from Rosenwald is that the white school board, when they built these things, they had to follow these plans, which makes it really nice for researchers now, because once you've seen one of these things, you know where they're at, you know you got one, which is really exciting. This is the marker that's at the Florence Villa Training School site for the first Florence Villa. Now the thing that stands out the most about Florence Villa is it's on there. It says white donations $11,000. That is like, I've not obviously researched 5,000 Rosenwald schools, but I can tell you I've done more than a couple, and that's about the most I've ever seen coming from the white population of a town. And that's explained in the History of Florence Villa. That's a book that you can look at here. And I have a bibliography type thing for further research on these schools that's available for anybody who wants one when we're done. And it also gives all the locations of the 5 Rosenwald schools that we had here in Polk County, which is nice, because when I started working on this thing, where is it? This is not something you Google and figure out. You have to figure out what the town is and then go there, because nobody's going to know what you're talking about. Hey, where's the Haines City School? Oh, well, it's up there on that hill, right? And so But anyway, this is the marker for the first Florence Villa. And there's the layout for the first Florence Villa. And it's a 6-teacher type, just like the Oakland School. But see how different it is? And it was because it faced north and south. So they were once again maximizing their light. And this is the Union Academy. Once again, there's one of those things that you don't see on Rosenwald schools. And this is right here in Bartow. And this picture was given to me by Leo Longworth, former mayor of Bartow. And this was, I don't know who took this, and Leo wasn't sure either. But we're looking at this car, and judging by the car, this was taken sometime in the 1940s. But notice in the 1940s, no cupola. I don't know when it was taken down. Anybody know? I don't know. But it's not there now. And there's the Union Academy today. This is the only Rosenwald-funded school that still stands in Polk County. All the rest of them are gone. To back up, I didn't mention this, the second Florence Villa was built a mile from where this one was burned down. And it's at what is now the Jewett Academy. But the building and the footprint are gone, but Jewett Academy obviously is still there. Union Academy 1940, Union Academy today. And this is the last one, and probably the best one, because this is a classic Rosenwald school. This is a 2-teacher type, and it was in Lake Alfred in the Fruitlands Park area. And today, the old Fruitland Park Elementary School still stands there, but this school is obviously gone. But we had, over here was a classroom, over here was a classroom, and this part that sticks out in the front, that was your industrial room. And they would teach carpentry or metal working in that front room. And you can see the big bank of 4 windows right there. And then that's the back of it. And once again, there's those banks of windows, 5 there, and big. And this is actually a picture of what was in Lake Alfred. This is the school. There's a town councilman in Lake Alfred named Albertus Maltzby. And the Lake Alfred Historical Society and myself and somebody from the History Center here had the opportunity to interview Mr. Maltzby. And he went to this school, and he's, 82? 82, and so Lake Alfred's been around like 102 years. So 82 of these years, this man's been there. And so we got him to come in and talk to us about this. But when we asked him to come, we said, Mr. Maltzby, we'd like to talk about the Rosenwald School. And he said, I don't know, if I can help you or not. He said, I don't know about any Rosenwald School. And at the time, I knew there was a Rosenwald School, but I didn't know anything about any Fruitlands Academy. And so we sat down together, and we looked at some of these books that I brought in. I showed him the picture of Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, and explained a little bit this to Mr. Maltzby. And he's still kind of like, well, that's really cool, and that was a great man to help out like that. And then I showed him that picture, and his face went, and he goes, I went to school there. And I said, yes. And so then he told me about it being the Fruitlands Academy. And I had no clue. There was no finding it out. I mean, it's just not something that you look up. So and these kind of encounters happen all the time. These schools are just tremendous. And there's the layout for the 2-teacher type Rosenwald School that was in Lake Alfred. This is the quintessential Rosenwald School. Out of the 5,387 buildings they built, almost 2,000 of them were that design right there. And they had these all over the place. These buildings are on the top 11 most endangered of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So they're extremely difficult to locate. If you find one, you'll know it, from what you see in these pictures. Once you see one, and then you start looking at them, you can pick them out pretty good. But some of them are pretty well hidden. The Rosenwald Schools, let's see, where am I going? The Rosenwald Schools, I think, share a big part of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. They taught good citizenship, they taught getting along, organizing. The white school boards worked with the African American Rosenwald Fund people and the African Americans in the community. It's really a very positive story, the entire thing. Two of the most famous alumni from a Rosenwald school would be Representative John Lewis of Georgia. It was a Rosenwald alumni from Alabama. And probably definitely the most famous person ever in a Rosenwald school went to a 6-teacher type, like that, where'd it go? That one, in Stamps, Arkansas, and her name was Maya Angelou. After the building fund stopped building schools in 1932, the fund stayed open. They stopped in 1932 for a few different reasons. The main reason is they achieved their goal of 5,000 schools, which achieved it by a lot. The buildings, I should say, not schools, 5,387. The buildings, the reason you count buildings is because they also made industrial shops and they made teachers' homes. Teachers' homes are even rarer than the schools. I've been fortunate enough to see 2 of those. And after we get done, I'll be done here in a minute, we'll have a question and answer. And then if anybody wants to hang out, I can show you some success stories of places that I've been that are restored and places that aren't. But anyway, when they got done with the building plan, they exceeded their 5,000 school goal. Julius Rosenwald died in 1932. The entire nation was gripped by the Great Recession, but the fund continued on. And they changed their focus from building schools to helping artists and writers who were African American. And some of the people who benefited from the Rosenwald program were Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin actually got money to go to France, and the opera singer Marian Anderson also got money from the Rosenwald Fund to go to France. And there was even a white man that got some money from the Rosenwald Fund, and it was folk singer Woody Guthrie. He's the only one I've been able to come by that was getting money from the Rosenwald Fund. Well, they ended the building in 1932, as I said, but in 1929 they had a school building meeting in New York City. And it was for white schools and African American schools, and the governor of New York at the time was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, he had already begun going to Warm Springs, Georgia. And so when he was there in 1929, he made a deal with one of the representatives from the Rosenwald Fund that when he got ready, he was going to get some money to build a Rosenwald School in Warm Springs, Georgia. Well, he didn't get ready in time. And then they had sent some money to Warm Springs, but the money got appropriated to the white school instead of building an African American school, and so he lost out. So in 1937, he said, hey, I'm ready for my money now. And the Rosenwald School, the Rosenwald Fund was still in effect. It lasted till 1948, until the money dried up. But then they still had it, but they're like, we don't do schools anymore. And they said, all right, well, if you'll promote it and you'll take care of getting the rest of the money, then we'll go ahead and we'll do it. And so they gave him $2,500, and it was the Eleanor Roosevelt School was opened in 1937, and it was the 5,358th school and last Rosenwald School ever built in 1937. So anyway, I wanted to include that in my talk. I forgot that. I'm glad everybody's still here. Now let me get past where we were. Now I want to show you some of the places that I've been. This is a one-teacher school type, which is on that drawing. The plans for that are on the easel outside, if anybody saw them when they came in. Now you can look at them when you come out. But when you find these things nowadays, this is what you're going to see if it hasn't been restored, if you can find anything at all. This is in Washington County, North Carolina, and I mean it is in the middle of nowhere. And this is the inside of it, and this is not a great picture, but you can see the big banks of windows, And the beadboard on the walls and the beadboard on the ceilings, they all had that. And they all would use either white or blue. These walls are actually blue, but they would be blue usually on the bottom, and sometimes they would have wainscot that would go up till about the base of the windows all the way around the school. And they would use light blue, they would use white, they would use teal inside of these buildings. And this one is, as I said, in east central North Carolina. This one is almost to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. This is in Currituck County. This school, now you can see how they have the blue and the white, and behind those doors, that's one of the separators. They would have a separator in between classrooms, like the two-teacher type that the Fruitlands had a wall that went between the two school classrooms, and they would take that wall down if they wanted to have the kids wanted to have a play, or if the people in the community wanted to have a meeting, and they could get together in there and have a large meeting room. So they were truly community schools, and they were used for all kind of community events. This is a two-teacher, which is the outside of that, and this thing actually got moved here by a local businessman. There's only a couple ways to get to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. If anybody's ever been out there, you know. And so this one was right next to the road, and they were going to make the road wider. Well, the fellow that bought the house knew that they were going to widen the road, and he also knew what it was. He knew it was a Rosenwald School. The people that owned the property, I don't know if they knew it was or not, but somebody had turned the thing into a house. So he offered to buy it off the people, and it was in this kind of condition. And they fired him this crazy price that was just way out of his ballpark. So when they got ready to come in, the county came to him first and said, hey, look, we're tearing that thing down tomorrow. So he went to the owners of it again. He offered them $5,000. They took it, and then he moved it a quarter mile down the road next door to his barbecue restaurant. And so he's in the process of restoring it. And when I showed up there, this is the kind of stuff that happens to me all the time. They were taking down the inside drywall and stuff of where people had turned it into a house. And here I come and see all this pristine beadboard and stuff inside the house. And I just happened to be there. It was awesome. It was just great. This is what the desks look like. And they would sit, and then there would be another one with the top. The desk, obviously, platform was up there. And so you'd have these things lined up like Legos, and they'd sit on these things. And this is inside of a school in the Carolinas also that I'm currently working on. Wrong way, Washington. Let's see here. There we go. That is in another school, and it's hard to tell, but this is blue walls back here, and you can see the bottom of the big banks of windows there. This is either a one teacher or a two teacher. I haven't discovered it yet. But when I saw this bench in there, I like to fell over. That is a real bench that first graders used to sit on in a Rosenwald school. And you can picture them lined up on that thing in there to go to school. And this was, I'm not kidding you, I was jumping up and down when I found this place. It was incredible. This one is in Lake County, Florida. And it's a two-teacher type, still standing. And this back part of the building right here was not part of the first building. They got the property from a preacher who donated it, and before they even knew they were going to get their money from the Rosenwald Fund, they built this front part of it. Then after they got it built, the money came in, and then they went to the school board and said, hey, we need an industrial room back here. So they were going to build a 12 by 12 room on the back of this, and the school board said, well, why don't you just go ahead and build a 12 by 20, because it won't cost that much more. And since they had done all the work on the thing themselves, the school board allowed them to build a bigger industrial room than what they wanted. Rare, but good. This is in Mount Dora, and this still stands, and this is a two-teacher type, and it's a children's daycare. But this wood that's above these windows, so like I say, once you see one of these things and start understanding what they look like, you can look at something like this and say, hey man, that looks a lot like a Rosenwald School. And sure enough, it was. And there's a historical marker out in front of this one too in Mount Dora. It's not that far away. You can go up and visit it. It's pretty neat. This one is in North Carolina, And that's a 3-teacher type Rosenwald School. Now, I don't know, you can see above those windows that dark up there where they used to be bigger. But it's actually a duplex now. And I didn't go in this one, but there's people actually living in it. But the reason that I got the giveaway on whether it was a Rosenwald school or not is right next door, there was a church where the kids used to go to school that predates this Rosenwald school by about 20 years. So that when you put the church with the school, you got your Rosenwald school. That was also very fun to find. This one is not a Rosenwald building. Obviously that's made out of brick. But what I like about this is this Rosenwald Community Center. This is a mistake that a ton of people make. They said, oh, the Rosenwald School used to be there, but they turned it into a community center. No, they didn't turn it into one. It was built as a community center in the beginning. It also functioned as a school. So they didn't turn them into community centers. They were community centers. But I thought that was real interesting. This is a county training school, which you seldom see these 2-story jobs. But this is a county training school also in Northeast North Carolina. This one is the first one that I ever saw. And in this picture, you can actually see the building, but the first time I saw it, you couldn't see any of it. You could see a little bit of the windows. It was all covered up with everything under the sun. This is in Dorchester County, South Carolina. And this is the one that the lady pointed out to me when I first found out what a Rosenwald school was. And there it is, cleaned up. It's a big 6-teacher type. The first Florence Villa would have looked just like this. And they're actually restoring this thing. This is the library that's inside. Once again, the blue walls, the beadboard, they're all over the place, but they're all the same. This was a building that was behind the one that I just showed you. It's behind this. Now, the researchers up there told me that that was a cafeteria, but in my opinion, it was an industrial shop. And I had plans of the industrial shop made up to pass around to you, and I forgot them. But anyway, it's a cafeteria according to the researchers up there. Now they're building this over the top of it, and they're going to restore it, and I'm not clear. At first I thought they were going to take all this down after they got it restored, but look at how substantial they're making it. It's like, holy moly. They're going to build that and then take it down? But I don't know if that's going to be like a cocoon for the thing or what. Right. This is a 2-teacher type that looks just like the Lake Alfred School or the Fruitlands Academy. It looked just like this with doors on either side. And this is a community development office in a place called Gatesville, North Carolina, which is right up in northeast corner of North Carolina on the Virginia border. And they did a beautiful job restoring this. Now, I was there on a Sunday, so I didn't get to go inside. But I don't know if the inside was done or not. This is the back of it, and there's your telltale sign of big banks of windows. And this one's got 6 and 6. The Fruitlands Academy had 5 and 5. And this, once again, this thing is out in the middle of nowhere. This is a teacher's home. And this is really cool because you see the brick buildings and stuff around the outside of it? That's on the campus of South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And I went in there, I went out there and I didn't know it was there at all, but I knew that there was some kind of Rosenwald structure in Orangeburg. And so I went to the campus because everything else was closed the day I was there. I set out with no notes, no GPS, no nothing. And I said, all right, well, no problem. I'll just use my usual places, the Chamber of Commerce, the library, the City Hall, and all these people help you when you're looking for things like this. But it was Veterans Day. And I didn't even know it. And I'm like, so I get there and I got nothing. So I went to the campus and there was an African-American student, young woman, super nice, and she was in the security gate in the front. And I asked her about Rosenwald building, and she says, oh, I'm into history, and she says, but I don't know what a Rosenwald building is. And so I told her a little bit, and then we're talking, and I look in my mirror, and there's 6 cars behind me waiting to get in. I said, wait a minute. So I pull off to the side, and she comes over, and we're talking, and then finally, she had a smartphone. I didn't even have that with me. So she took out her smartphone, she says, there is one. and it's on campus. And I go, you're kidding. She says, just go down here. And so I went down there, and it's a student development center office, and there's 2 ladies that work in it. They invited me in to look around. It's all totally been modernized inside, but they let me go in the bathrooms, the closets, lift the ceiling tiles to see if I could find any of the old beadboard or anything, but I was unsuccessful. So but it was a teacher's home, and the Rosenwald School used to be on the South Carolina State campus also, just down from where this teacher's home is. And this one here is the biggest success story that I've ever come across. This is a teacher's home that's outside of Orangeburg, about 18 miles, still in Orangeburg County, South Carolina. And I went to this teacher's home after I went to the one at South Carolina State, this one. The ladies that worked there told me about this one. And when I got up that morning, I didn't know about either one of them. And it's impossible to find a teacher's home. So I got 2 of them in the same day. But anyway, this one was only open on Thursday, and as I said, I was there on Veterans Day, which was a Friday, so this place is closed up. But I'm walking around outside of it taking pictures, and just next door to this school, I don't have a picture, or this teacher's home, next door there's the community center on the footprint where the Rosenwald School used to be that got burnt down in 1961. But when it got burnt down, this thing was covered up like that other school I showed you with weeds, and nobody knew what it was. So the county came in one day and they said, okay, we're going to tear this thing down. But there was an elderly gentleman, his name is Mr. Kennerly, and he said, oh no, wait, this is an historic building. You can't tear that down. And nobody knew a teacher's home from Adam, but he knew. And so they ended up restoring this, and the inside of it is absolutely beautiful. They've got the original floors in it. I wish I had pictures of everything to show you, but this is a place that's definitely worth visiting. And when I went there, it was closed up, locked up, but at the community center next door happened to be the woman that spearheaded the entire project for this. And she saw me out there taking pictures, and she comes out and she goes, how you doing? I said, I'm doing good. She said, you want to go inside? And I said, I hope to tell you I do. And so she took me inside and gave me a tour of the thing. And it was excellent, just excellent. So anyway, that's what I have and what I have for you. And I really appreciate everybody coming. Yes, ma'am.
Ask about the financing for the teachers' homes, how that fits in with building the schools.
They didn't have a separate fund for it. It was all in the same pile of money.
Sometimes you had teachers' homes with the schools, and sometimes you didn't.
Yeah, but very few. I mean, in Florida, we had 120 schools. We had 1 teacher's home and 4 industrial shops. And the teacher's home was in Leesburg, and it's gone. Yes, sir.
One question, and that is considering the racial history of the South. Are any of these schools victims of violence, burned to the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. The first Florence Villa is an example of that. It was opened in I think December 17th or December 5th or something like that, 1924, and it was burned a month and a half later in January of 1925. And it was by arson. They did offer a reward for it. I've got a newspaper article for it. And they offered a $500 reward, but nobody was ever charged and nobody was ever prosecuted, and they never found out who did it. And then another situation like that happened in Dade City. Pasco County had 1 Rosenwald school. Hillsborough County had 0 Rosenwald schools. Hardee County, none. Highlands County, 1 in Sebring. Osceola County, none. Orange County, 5. That was where Zora Neale Hurston was from, by the way, in Eatonville. And so our neighboring counties didn't have that many. We had 5. It was probably the most, except for Orange is the same. But anyway, the same thing happened in Dade City, and I've not been able to figure this out because these schools existed right around the Prohibition time. And apparently, right after Prohibition, a fellow in Dade City applied for a liquor license, but they wouldn't give him the liquor license because he was too close to the Rosenwald School. So his solution to the problem was, and he burned the school down. And once again, that one didn't even get investigated. And so nobody got charged, nothing. And the ironic thing about this is that where this school used to be, there's an empty field. But if you stand in that field and look about here across the street, there's a liquor store to this day. It's unbelievable. Good question. Yes?
You did not mention any in Lakeland. Were there none?
No, there was none in Lakeland because that was a city. And that was the city. They had the Moorhead School was in Lakeland. And it's good that you brought that up too, because they actually got some money from Rosenwald. They got $40 and they used it to buy a radio. Anybody else? Thanks so much again for coming, everybody. I really appreciate it. Oh, yeah.